what you should understand from the previous discussion is that fractions and decimals represent the same thing, part of a whole, some kind of piece of a bigger picture. So when I see 3/4, I know that means 3 little pieces if the entire picture was cut into 4 pieces. But how can I represent that in the form of a decimal? Well, actually, mathematically, fractions actually represent division. So if I want to convert a fraction into a decimal, all I have to do is divide the numerator, so that's this top number, by the denominator. So the numerator divided by the denominator. Now this first one I'm actually going to do by hand, and I'll do this one by hand, but I won't do the rest by hand. Usually people do this on a calculator, but depending on the class you're in, you might need to do this by hand. I'm going to assume that you know division. You just need to see that you divide the numerator by the denominator. Now, a lot of times our numerator is smaller, so it's a little bit different than other division. Okay, so 4 doesn't go into 3 it goes into 3 less than 1 time. So, okay, so I want to say instead, does 4 go into 30? So I put a decimal there, and I put a couple of zeros. So 4 goes into 30, that's true. It goes in there 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28. Difference is 2. Okay, 4 doesn't go into 2 also, so I want to bring down the 0. 4 does go into 20. 4 times 5 is 20, and nothing left. So 3/4 is actually equal to 0.75. This is no different than if I would take 3 divided by 4 in the calculator. Okay, let's look at a few others that are a little bit different. Okay, 1/5 equals 0.2. The way I find that is I do 1 divided by 5, and my calculator gives me 0.2. You'd also do it by hand if you like. Okay, 17/20. That's 17 divided by 20. I get 0.85. 48/211. That's 48 divided by 211. Now I get a pretty long decimal for this, so I rounded it off, and that's what this little squiggly line right here means. It means this is approximately equal to 0.227. Here's an interesting thing that happens with fractions and with decimals. A fraction is an exact number. When I tell you 48/211, that's exactly the number I'm talking about. 0.227 is an approximation of that number. If I wanted to write down this fraction exactly, I would write down the entire decimal. But it's common to round, and some of these decimals get really long. So again, that's a difference between the way we represent things with fractions versus the way we represent things with decimals. However, a weakness of fractions, even though they're exact, is 48/211 is difficult to picture. But 0.227, you can almost think, well, that's almost a fourth. That's easier to picture. Okay. What about 1/3? If I do 1 divided by 3, my calculator just gives me a bunch of 3's, 0.333. This decimal actually never ends. The pattern just keeps going, 0.33333 forever. So the way that this is usually written is equals 0.3 with a line over it to represent that it repeats forever. You will see people do this approximation symbol and say approximately 0.3 or approximately 0.33. That's all right as well. But again, the main thing you should get from this is you divide the numerator by the denominator. Now, this brings up an interesting thing. When I look at fractions that have the same numerator and the same denominator, I'm going to get 1. So 5/5, 5/5, that's 1. 3/3, that's 1. 622, 622, that's 1. All because this means division. X over x, that's going to be 1 almost always. There's only one special case. Square root of 2x minus 7 over the square root of 2x minus 7, that's going to be 1. Again, as long as the numerator and denominator are the same, since you're dividing, it's going to equal 1. Only one special case. Can't divide by 0. 0/0 doesn't make sense, so it does not equal 1. If you think about this in terms of division, it's saying 0 divided by 0. So you're asking yourself, how many times does 0 go into 0? You could say 1, or you could argue none. So typically what we call this is an indeterminate form. An easier way to think about it is it's just undefined. We're not going to decide, well, this is 1 or this is 0. In fact, any time you divide by 0, it's going to be undefined. So even 5 divided by 0 is undefined. So 5/0, completely undefined. Think about why. Okay, if I asked you what's 5 divided by 0, you're trying to think, okay, 0 times something is going to give me 5. What times 0 gives you 5? Well, you're going to have trouble answering that question because there's nothing times 0 that'll give you 5. So again, it's undefined. So dividing by 0 doesn't work, which is why 0 over 0 is an indeterminate form. All right. What about these improper fractions? So in the last video, I was talking about when you have a numerator that's larger than the denominator. Well, it still works the exact same way. Just like 4 over 4 is still 4 divided by 4, 5 divided by 4 is just 5, or 5/4 is just 5 divided by 4. Same thing. So it's 1.25. So when you have a fraction where the numerator is bigger than the denominator, you're going to end up with a number that's larger than 1. So 3/2, for instance, 3 over 2, that's 1.5. So you're going to notice this as we work with different values, and then later in math, people usually leave it as 5 over 4. It's uncommon to see it written as 4 and 1/4 like you might see in other situations.